So we want to get right into it.
Yes, we
Um, so what I would like to do is to introduce the person who's going to be moderating the East Coast panel, and that is Joan Hantman.
the wonderful and the magnificent Joan Hantman.
Hi, it's good to be here. Thank you so much for
Joni,
asking me
hey,
to
did we
moderate.
coordinate today or what?
I know I like
Joan,
your
can you be a little louder?
I maybe.
Yeah, you need to be a little louder. And I'm not talking about the pink.
All right, can you hear me now?
Much better.
Better,
I will
yes.
speak up. Anyway, thank you so much for asking me to moderate. I caught the tail end of the 70s, but I have a panel here who really danced throughout the 70s, and I'm going to use Sherry's word. They are true luminaries from that era. They are influencing and did influence others. They are amazing dancers. So let me introduce them. We have Michael Ginsberg, dancer, musician who's involved in dancing in New York City. I believe at Hungarian House, at Barrack Street, at various EEFC camps. So welcome, Michael. And you can applaud individually or at the end. Since we're on Zoom, you can do it however you like. Next, we have Joe Kalunides Graziosi from the greater Boston area. And in fact, Waltham, and excuse me if my Waltham accent pops back into play. We actually grew up a few streets away from each other and went to the same college even. So Joe also danced in New York. He was also involved in many EEFC camps, East Coast camps, dancing at MIT and I believe the Folk Arts Center. So we're very pleased to have him.
Joe, there's something wrong with your video.
Yeah, I sent a message a while back. I can't seem to get my camera to engage. I'm not sure what I did wrong. Maybe because I came in late.
Well, your voice sounds good.
Okay, that's all you need, right?
Yeah.
Joe,
No.
this is Holly. You can try unplugging the camera and plugging it back in, and then make sure it's selected in your Zoom settings.
What do you mean selected? Yeah, I mean okay. I just unplugged it and replugged it, but it's still not engaging.
Well, let's meet the rest of the panel while you're working on that.
Right.
And Joan, I just wanted to say, even though Sherry and I are off screen, if you want to direct your comments to everyone, if you have any comments or questions for the panelists, and we will go ahead and try and send them on to you, Joni, right? And try to get those audience participation going.
So I'll explain after I introduce our panel how this will play out. And then hopefully, if there's any questions after that, we'll get them into chat.
Thank you.
So we have Marty Koenig from New York City. He was the founder of the Ethnic Folk Arts Center. Marty, we're very pleased to have you here with us. Steve Kotansky, dancer and teacher also in the New York area, danced at Barrack Street and Hungarian House. And Steve is both an East Coast and a West Coast 70s dancer. So he can talk a little bit more about that. Linda Mansdorf from Greenbelt, Maryland. She also runs a Zoom group, which is fantastic on Friday nights. And she was a dancer in the Tomov Performing Ensemble. So I hope she's going to give us a little bit more information about performing on the East Coast. David Skidmore from the Boston area. He danced at MIT, the Folk Arts Center. He was a lead dancer in the Mandala Folk Dance Ensemble. He was one of my personal mentors in Boston. So we're very pleased to have him with us. Randy Spiegel, dancer mostly in New York in the 70s, at the Flushing Y with Kenny Spear, in Manhattan with Steve Zalf. She also danced at Columbia and the 92nd Street Y, and also with Carl Finger in Brooklyn and Manhattan. So we're very pleased to have Randy Spiegel with us. We have Kathy Springer, another dancer from the New York City area. She is a founder and director of the Bosilek Folk Dance Ensemble, very knowledgeable about Bulgarian dance. We're thrilled to have Kathy today. And Larry Weiner, another teacher from the Maryland area. He teaches in Greenbelt. He was a co-founder of the Buffalo Gap Camp and co-founder of the Bulgarian Folk Music and Dance Seminar in Plovdiv. So that is our illustrious panel. Welcome, all of you. Again, I'm just thrilled to have you with us. So I have a couple of questions, which our panel has seen in advance. So what we'll do is, give you each a minute or two to talk about them. I'll let you pass on the baton as you like. Just keep all your mics on if you can for our panel, and feel free to chime in anytime you'd like. And I'll try to start with a different person for each question, but I'd like it to be just a very free form conversation, as opposed to just having each of you, go down the line and answer questions. So we'll make it more of a conversation. And if anyone has any additional questions in chat, we'll try to answer those either during or at the end of the session. So I want to start with first question, basically, why did you dance in the 70s? Or why did you start dancing in the 70s? What prompted you to dance? So let's start right in the middle of my screen. Linda Mansdorf, why don't you start us off?
Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen. So give me a second. And this is why I was dancing in the 70s. My parents met dancing and they brought me up dancing. So by the 70s, I was already dancing for 20 years. And after that, when I was young, I went to folk dance house with my parents. And here I am with Marianne Herman. And I'm somewhere in this group of the kids at Family Day. So my experience was growing up dancing. And these couple of pictures are from when the when the Moiseev came and joined us dancing at Folk Dance House. That was great. And this man in the middle here is Igor Moiseev, and this one at the right is my father. So dancing was just something that I did naturally. It was part of who I was. And this is a picture of Folk Dance House from the outside, 1968. Tony LaGreca standing in front of the door. And it's funny because so I started and I was dancing all my life, but as a teenager, there was a teenage group. And I think about all these young people now who grow up and they're looking at their phone, my daughter included. And when we were teenagers, we were so fortunate to have that. So that's just some of how I started dancing and what I was doing in the 70s. And I went to all the different groups. I went to Marty Koenig's group, loved that. I went to the Israeli dancing, Casa Galicia after that, and Balkan Arts. can't remember all of the different places I went to, but I was always dancing.
Feel free, panel, just chime in.
Joni, this is Sherry. So I had also invited Joyce Holcomb, and I didn't get an answer from her, but she's here and would like to participate. So can we add her in also?
Absolutely.
You can go ahead and we'll get her. And
Anybody else? Come on, people. David, why did you start dancing?
All right.
What?
I have a kind of a similar story to Linda's. When I was growing up, my parents lived in Albany, New York, and they were part of a folk dance group in Albany, run by a couple, Nat and Peg Rubin, and they were kind of a clone of the Hermans. They would go down to New York and dance at Folk Dance House and dance with the Hermans, learn whatever they wanted to learn, and then they'd come back up to Albany and they'd teach it. And it was a very similar group. I was not a regular part of the group, but they took me and my sisters to Christmas parties every so often. So I was familiar with folk dancing by the time I got into high school. Not a regular, but then my parents switched off to Western square dancing, and I was not interested in that at all. But there was a group, and Peg Rubin's group basically folded. But there was a group over in Schenectady run by Dick and Bess Hale, and I got my driver's license that allowed me to go driving at night. So hey, that was a great excuse to go drive 20 miles and go folk dancing. So I started doing that every 2 or 3 weeks. Then my first year in college, I was at Cornell, and Cornell was a huge folk dance place. I mean, they had their Wednesday night was probably 100, 150 people on a regular basis. So at Cornell, I started dancing 4 nights a week, one Israeli performing group. Wednesday nights, the big international. Sunday nights was the advanced Balkan class, advanced Balkan, etc. night that you didn't hear about unless somebody came up to you and say, "Hey, see you Sunday night," and they say, "What? Oh, okay, fine." And I was also dancing either Scottish or English on another night. My studies suffered, needless to say, and I bounced out of Cornell pretty quick. And the next year I didn't dance at all. Then I went to school in Pittsburgh in 60, 68, 67, 68, or 68, 69, whichever. And I danced every third week or so over at Carnegie Mellon, and ended up dancing with 3 different groups in the Pittsburgh Folk Festival. Danced with the Hungarians from McKeesport, and the Israeli group and the English group in performance. And then I moved back to Albany, danced occasionally at a group at the SUNY State University of New York at Albany, where I met my first wife. But I had spent a couple of months in Boston in the middle of the winter in 68, and I fell in love with the place. Never danced once while I was there, but I knew that there was folk dancing there. I danced with Connie and Marianne other places. But when a friend of mine from Pittsburgh moved to Boston, he called me up and said, "Hey, Skid, you want to come over and live in Boston?" I said, "Sure, why not?" Moved and went dancing at MIT in the first week that I was there. I walked in, 150, 250 people. I don't know how many there were, but it was huge. And everybody's dancing at the same time, doing the same thing. It was like I walked in, I found my people. So I started dancing at MIT and also at the Folk Arts Center, Marianne and Connie's place. And never saw any reason to stop. I got various jobs, but they were all to support my folk dance habit. Okay, next.
Larry.
Speak up, Kettle. Good, Larry Weiner.
Well,
Where were you in the 70s?
I started dancing in Boston in 1960. I was born and raised in Boston, and the first folk dance I went to was at Sargent College in 1960, and that was because the young woman that I was dating, my girlfriend at the time, was a phys ed student there. And she said, "Why don't you come dancing? It's really a lot of fun." And I walked into this room and there were people dancing and I loved it. Um, I think it was mainly the music that hit me first. And the very first tune I heard, sorry, Joe, was Miserlou. And
Don't be sorry about that.
anyway, I stayed in Boston until 1963 and then moved to Washington, D.C., fell in love with the city here and have been here ever since, dancing ever since. But when I was in Boston, I was dancing Ted Snella's group with Connie and Marianne, with E. Eddie Nadell at Boston University. It was a great scene.
Andy, tell us who influenced you. Who were your teachers in the 70s?
Mute. You talking to me? Oh, is she talking to me?
You're the only Randy here.
Oh, I didn't hear Randy. Okay, I think said Larry. Well, actually, I'm dancing the shortest amount of time compared to everybody else on the panel. I started in 1968. At summer camp, I started with Israeli folk dancing. And then I spread my wings and got to the Flushing Y and danced with Kenny Spear. Oh, I met a lot of choreographers came through. Michael was there. Michael taught there. Moshiko would come almost every week because he was dating someone who was a folk dancer. Danny Uziel came every week just as a dancer. It was really amazing. Moshe came. I was scared of him then. But it was a huge gathering that I had really never seen before, because even in camp, it's smaller people. But people who influenced me, I would say just all the teachers who came through Kenny. Optimists would give workshops. I learned from everyone there, and it was eye-opening. And there were folk dance groups. I don't know if you remember George Sinishai had his own performing group, and people would join different folk dance groups. People who went there also joined Tomo, and that Linda was in Tomo. But anyway, so that's my story.
So talking to some of our sorry, go ahead.
So I was teaching special education in the Howard County, Maryland, and the gym teacher pulled out a flyer and said, "Joyce, do you want to come to this folk dancing in Columbia, Maryland?" And I said, "Okay." So we ended up going to the Columbia, Maryland folk dancing, and that was in '73. So that's when I started folk dancing. And so I still have the t-shirt that says Columbia, Maryland folk dancing. And so I went there like every week. And then my circumstances changed in my life. I had to come home and help my parents and my sister. And so then I moved to New York. And then I started dancing on the 14th Street where Tomoff had a studio. And so I started dancing there and Linda and I were in this troupe together, and you could see my Tomoff shirt. So that from the Tomoff. And so we went to the former Yugoslavia together, and we performed in all of the 7 states of Yugoslavia at the time, 7 regions. And then we came in 5th, which was amazing because we were the only American non-Yugoslavs to perform. and we made a movie. I mean, there was there was a lot of dancing, which was a lot of fun, but there was no sleep on the agenda. So we traveled in buses and flights and whatnot. And just to let you know that at Kaler Hall, to this day, they started dancing in about 1968. I went to the 50th anniversary because of Judy Weintraub. I met her in Portland, and she told me about it. And so they are still dancing at Kaler Hall Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock. Anybody want to go? You're welcome. So they've been dancing for over 50 years, and I have some photos of the 50th celebration there. And I moved around, and I've danced on the West Coast, and I've continued, and I was teaching a class in Oregon until I moved. And then when the Zoom came in, I'm still involved in some of the teaching of the Tuesday night in Oregon. So even though I live now in Nashville, Tennessee.
Great that everyone is still pretty
I
much
could go.
and we'll talk more about that as well. So to some of our teachers who are here, let me ask you who influenced you? So looking at Joe and Michael and Steve and Marty, tell us who your influencers were.
Okay, I'll start. This is Joe. You can't see me. I don't know why my camera isn't working, but a little bit of a background because I'm sort of like you, Joni. I started late with folk dancing. I didn't even discover it until the later 1970s. And not that I didn't dance, I danced as a youngster growing up, but it was in the community, the Greek American community of Boston area, at church functions and picnics and stuff. And I also danced a bit with the Armenians in the area, like in Watertown. I danced a lot with Gary and Susan Linsananian. We would go to different clubs that had live music and do Greek and Turk, Armenian, and or simple Debki kind of dancing. So I really didn't know that this thing called international folk dancing existed. In 1975, I did a semester abroad in Greece, in Athens, and I met up with, and one of the teachers at the was Ted Petridis, who some of you might know. He was from the New York area and was also a folk dance teacher in the United States before he moved to Greece. And I did a class with him on dance, traditional Greek dance. And coming back to the United States afterwards, it's like, okay, now what do I do with all this knowledge and the dances that I sort of picked up? And by accident, I think it was my last year at Brandeis, I ran into someone told me about there's some kind of dancing, maybe Greek dancing happening in some building at Brandeis that this guy was leading, and it turned out to be Henry Goldberg. And, so I went in and I heard this thing in 7/8. You know, I said, "Oh, a Greek dance. It's 7/8. It has to be Greek." Well, it wasn't. It was Tina Mori. So, but he told me about the MIT folk dance. I said, "What's that?" And it just described and everything. And so I started going to MIT and folk dance club, and I became a sort of regular, mostly a Tuesday nighter. I was a Tuesday nighter because my vision was a little narrow. I said I like Greek and I like Balkan, and so I went there for Tuesday nights. But it wasn't until I moved to New York in the late '70s, that was '79, I think, with two very close friends that I met at MIT folk dancing, of course, Janice Starling and Carol Fishman. It wasn't until I moved to New York and discovered, and well, we already had been a few times for special events sponsored by the then Balkan Arts Center, Martin Koenig and Ethel Rain. And it was in New York that I really, really got into folk dancing. But again, Balkan-centered folk dancing. Friday nights got first at Casa Galicia and then at the on Varick Street. And what was happening was that people I met at Friday night, say, for example, Steve Katansky, they kept on encouraging me to, why don't you show this dance, or why don't you start teaching, and and this and that. And eventually I said, okay. And I did a class through the Ethnic Folk Arts Center once a week. I think it was a weekly class. And at the same time, I had discovered the Greek American communities, dance community there with Paul Guinness, and we kind of started up this group called Greek American Folklore Society, a dance troupe. But eventually, push, 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 and with Steve and other people, and they introduced me to the West Coast, mostly at the Mendocino camp, East European Folklife Center camps, and that's how I kind of started teaching, uh, whatever. But I did not really know. I felt a little awkward. I got to be honest with you. I felt like the lone townie in the sea of, foreign, non-native Massachusettsians in the Boston area. Um, and I went to a few workshops with, named teachers. There was like Johnny Pappas and others that went. And I said, oh, wow, this is interesting. These people are going around the country teaching dance. But I never thought I would be one of those eventually. But as it turned out, I was. So there we go.
Joni, I'm going to jump in because I didn't really move to the East Coast until early 1980.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because yeah, right. So I mean, the 70s, if we don't bound it by just the 70s and include the beginning of the 80s.
We'll cut you in, Steve. Go ahead. Tell.
I want to say that two of the most exciting teachers I met when I started on the West Coast through Stan Isaacs were Marty Koenig and Larry Weiner. They came out and taught there. And then I joined Amman, and I heard from Lauren Brody about this guy that they used to call Michael Kopanitsa. And that was Michael Ginsberg. And the East Coast people were showing dances that were so much more exciting and felt so much more authentic, if that's I don't even like the word, but they felt that way. And that was Larry and Marty, who'd been over to the Balkans on more than one occasion and had actually, danced with ethnics. Anyway, so I came back in 1980, but Marty and I was just thinking, we were together in 1972 on a vacation on the Dalmatian island of Mljet, where Marty had done recordings for some of his non-such stuff. So then, I met my wife in the 70s, Susie, who danced with Tomov and was doing Hungarian dance. And anyway, I ended up in New York, and I'm still here.
Thankful for it.
But I want to hear from Marty and
Yes, I was going to say
Michael,
Marty,
the New York
I'm going to talk. I went to an all-boys high school in Manhattan, and I went to my first folk dance in the winter of 1955. So the 70s was a very distant place for me. I started in the mid-50s. I had no experience. I had never seen folk dancing before, never heard about it, anything about it. And simply I went with a bunch of guys to meet some girls through dancing, which was the way that we met people in the 50s, and mostly they were Lindy Hops. So I didn't know what kind of dancing we were going to. We were going to a dance. It turned out it was at the community, it was Community Church on 35th Street and Park Avenue. And the group did 3 square dances and 3 folk dances. And that was the menu of folk dancing in New York City in the 1950s. And that was the 3 folk dances that were done. I think the Dick had just come back from Yugoslavia, and kolos were taught. And I thought they were just terrific. The melodies, the Banat Tamburica Orchestra, they were just fabulous tunes, fabulous melodies. And I loved just what David said, just the whole ambiance of the place. And I didn't go back there. Somehow they never did dancing again at that church, but I went to Brooklyn College. And one of the young women that I had met at the dancing at the church, I met at the college, and she invited me to come to the folk dance club. And it was a similar situation, though it was a very small group. And it was a group of people that just folk danced for their pleasure. Their families folk danced. They had bungalow colonies upstate and whatnot, and they had folk dancing. When you wanted to do dancing, instead of doing Lindy hopping, you did this kind of dancing. And instead of doing singing songs, Americana, they sang Russian or Yiddish or various folk songs. And that was their way of self-entertainment. For myself, in the course of college, I went dancing every night of the week. I went and danced with Fred Burke on Wednesday night, Israeli dancing at the Y. I danced with Sonny Newman on Friday evenings at the Broadway Congregational Church. I danced at Earl Hall at Columbia, which was one of the favorite places to go to at Columbia University on Sunday evenings. I did Cayley dancing and the Rockaways on the boardwalk. I mean, the city was Yugoslav Hall, had dancing on 9th Avenue in the Midtown Manhattan. The place was just alive with dancing. And if college is to get you in touch with your passion, it certainly did it with me. It got me excited. It got me just so involved. And it was just a lot of fun. And I went and I started teaching in New York City in the 60s. And in the mid 60s, I started doing research in the Balkans. I went from 66 to 70, 3 months to 7 months each year in the Balkans. And then I'd come back and teach at Barnard College. And at Barnard, I started folk dancing a class, and I ended up having 3 classes at the college. And then we started having Winter Folk Festival, the Spring Folk Festival, because I felt, what's the use of these classes? The way people are involved is that they want to party. And so teaching the dances are only to enable you to go and have a party and have a good time. So that's where the festivals came about. And eventually, Ethel started working at the Smithsonian. She invited me to come down and work for the Smithsonian Festival of American Folk Life. And that started pulling me away from the folk dancing in terms of recreational folk dancing, and started pulling me into ethnic communities, organization, and basically championing and dedicating myself to preserving and presenting performing arts traditions, which included dance, but it's in a different context. It's like Joe was saying, Greeks doing Greek dancing, and not just Greeks doing Greek dancing, but with the fraternal organization, with a little region, so it can get smaller and smaller. I felt that my contribution to, and in terms of the person who greatly influenced me to go into doing this work was Atanas Kolorovsky. He came and taught this series, and once again, Ken Spears sponsored a workshop with him at Bohemian Hall and Park, where we eventually did all our spring festivals. And Atanas did a series of workshops in the early 60s, his first trip to America. And I had never seen dances like that. I never heard music like that. I wanted to be Atanas. I wanted Atanas's legs. I wanted his virtuosity. I mean, if I could have changed myself to be that person. And David, I've always loved your legs also, by the way. You were always a very strong dancer whenever I saw you in workshops. But that really was the inspiration for me to go and do the workshops. And then I was teaching in high school, and some Bulgarian kids told me, go to Bulgaria if you're interested in knowing this dance book. And that's what got me to go into the Balkans, and then to set up the Balkan Arts Center, which became the Ethnic Folk Arts Center, which now is the Center for Traditional Music and Dance, which is still doing the same thing, but it's gotten much broader than just the Balkans. It just encompasses all ethnic communities in the greater New York area. And a lot of these guys, we danced together, we taught together. It was quite an adventure, and I must say it was a very exciting period of my life I was married to my work for about 20 years before I got married to a person, and then I had children, and I got pulled out of that trench and into this other one.
Marty. And Michael, tell us a little bit about your influencers.
Linda Mansdorf's parents and my parents danced in the same circles. And my story is similar to hers in that
is that figuratively in the same circles or literally in the same circles?
Both.
Yes, literally in the same circles. And in fact, I remember going to Linda's 14th birthday party at the Russian Tea Room on 57th Street in Manhattan. My parents, their parents, and me and Linda. She was 14. I was a little older, I think. Anyway, it's the first time I met her, and I was in high school. I'd had a little bit of experience with my parents at dances. Once in a while they would bring me to a dance, and yeah, as a kid, I don't really remember much about it, but I do remember that I had those experiences, and I remember going to our country place, and again, it was a bungalow colony, and there were many folk dancers there, and their children and me, they would get us all together and teach us a dance for some kind of performance at the social hall at some point. We were in Schroon Lake. I remember going weekly to the square dances in Schroon Lake, kind of an amazing little town in the Adirondacks with a weekly dance with live music and a folk dance caller out on the town tennis courts in Schroon Lake. It was kind of a wonderful thing and really neat. So that was actually before I discovered Folk Dance House, and that was my mother said, there are these kids in the neighborhood that are going up to folk dance, to this folk dance. Would you like me? Why don't you join them? And I had known them. They were, again, kids of folk dancers, and so went with them to Folk Dance House. Folk Dance House was very unique, I think, in that it was totally dedicated to folk dancing. There was nothing else that happened in this space on West 16th Street in a very accessible place in Manhattan. All of their recordings, it was that time there were only records, vinyl records, were permanently there. They didn't have to put them in cartons and and lug them around to wherever they were doing the dance and pack them up and take them home afterwards. Everything was right there. Stage and on the stage there was places for these records. So anyway, I went to this teenage dance and wow, it was pretty neat. And I was a kind of a shy kid. I must have been, let's see, I was in high school at the time, not a senior, probably a sophomore in high school, and very shy. And it was a place I could go and I could just get into a circle and hold hands with people without even, asking someone to dance. It was like, wow, this is neat. I can hold hands with somebody and, so it was basically my only social outlet where I would be with girls. I was on a tennis team in Midwood High School and wound up going to Brooklyn College and playing tennis there too. But folk dancing was my one social outlet. I remember this was in the 60s now. By the time I got to the 70s, I had moved to North Carolina. So I hope it's okay to talk about the 60s a little bit. I remember about my third or fourth time going to this dance, Marianne Herman. Marianne did all the teaching. Michael would teach once in a while when Marianne needed a rest. So she taught a dance called Triti Poti. And I struggled with it. I was like, the first dance I came up against that I really, I didn't get it when she taught it. I remember going home that night and I was in bed, thinking about it, going over in my mind how she had taught it and going over in my mind and something clicked. I understood what I was supposed to do. I got out of bed. I did the dance. It worked. it felt right, and it was kind of an interesting moment because it was the moment which I understood the language of folk dance. Um, Never had trouble ever again understanding what the teacher wanted me to do. It was always very natural, easy to follow. Uh, so it was kind of a really an interesting moment. And at that moment, also, Marianne was a powerful person in folk dancing. Um, she did all the teaching. She wasn't a great teacher. And when I was learning this dance in my own head, what I'm supposed to do, I also, at the same time, was thinking, God, if she had explained it this way, it would have been easy. So at that same moment, when I discovered the language of folk dance, I also discovered sort of that, I had some inkling to be a teacher, um, which sort of later on happened. Um, so danced at folk dance house, danced at Columbia, and then got married. And my wife didn't like New York City. My brother was in North Carolina. I moved to North Carolina. By the way, nobody has mentioned David Henry yet. David Henry was another important figure in folk dancing in New York. He was really a Greekophile, but he did all kinds of stuff. And I wound up teaching a class with him on West 14th Street for a little while. Anyway, moved to North Carolina and lived there for about a year before I discovered that there was folk dancing in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It was interesting. I was at a modern dance concert, and maybe David can help me. I can't remember his name. He was from Boston, a very important dancer in Boston. He was married to a woman who had this progressive disease and couldn't move very well after a while, and wound up moving to Greensboro. Does that hit you anything, David? Is that pretty tall guy? No. Anyways, so anyway, he told me that there's folk dancing in Chapel Hill every Wednesday. So I went to this place. It was the student union and building, and we're just off campus. It was kind of neat, and it was a really a wonderful place. A lot of people coming. A very social place to be. Very active. Great dances. They had a system of placards where they post the name on of the dance, and it would either be red, green, or yellow, depending on how difficult it was. Um, Probably other places did too. I enjoyed that a lot. And in the meantime, um, Carl Finger started to ask me to come teach weekends for him once in a while. Uh, and so I sort of got my foot into doing workshops, basically with Carl. And then when I moved back to New York in 1976, Martin Koenig asked me to be a part of a group that ran a dance every Friday at Wine. We wound up doing it at Casa Galicia. Casa Galicia, again, was the first place where there was a restaurant attached to the place where we danced. It was a beautiful dance hall, aesthetically very, very beautiful. You could go, you could get a drink, you could have something to eat, and you could dance. And it was really in the East Coast, the only place like that I had encountered. And it grew immensely in its first few years. People discovered, it was a great place to be. A lot of young people there, big social scene. Um, and thank you, Martin. That was a great thing to do. Steve Katansky became a member of that group. Karen DeVries, Ellie Buck, and
Isn't it Tamor?
Ellie Buck was a wonderful dancer, and just the attractiveness of the whole scene was irresistible, basically. So it'd be my turn to teach every 6 weeks or run a dance, and otherwise just go and go to dance and have a good time. Meeting Steve was another, kick for me. Like Carl Finger got me started. Martin sort of elevated my game. And then Steve encouraged me and actually made connections for me to teach out on the West Coast, basically through Sherry Cochran, who arranged an amazing tour for me in California to teach. And then Steve also got me going in Europe. I mean, I owe a lot to Steve Kadansky too. There's a lot of people were mentioned here who I really owe a lot to. And now there's Larry. Didn't mention a lot about Buffalo Gap, but Buffalo Gap was an icon on the East Coast. It was again elevated folk dancing to another level. Great teachers would come. Petza came to teach several times, and Dick Crum was there a lot of times. It was just an amazing thing that happened. I came to that kind of late in the game. I mean, it had been going for a long time, and I came and wow, what an unbelievable thing that was for folk dancing. And so those are the days when folk dancing was the 70s, folk dancing was a real social scene. A lot of people met their spouses there or met their lovers there, or, it was a place to go and meet people and go and dance. And I look at Larry and Margaret. I mean, they met there too. It's like, right? So a wonderful era, the 70s, dancing in the East Coast. Going to the West Coast, it was interesting. My first time to the West Coast. And I kind of felt like, in a way, the West Coast was a little bit ahead of the East Coast. They had these folk dance cafes, like what we wound up doing in Casa Galicia, but more of it. You go dancing, and it would be, like the intersection. You go, it's a big social scene. It's more than just dancing. So anyway, I felt that, oh man, they got it really down here. They know what they're doing. And anyway, that's my story. So there's more to the story, but that's enough for now.
Kathy, actually, I want to start with you for this question.
Can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now? Better?
Okay,
not so much.
Joni, I just have to break in real quick before you ask Kathy. Yep. And by the way, hi, Kathy Springer. I just want to ask you real quick, tell you that we have less than 10 minutes left. It's
yes, I realize that. Yes.
Okay, so just giving you a little time check here. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right, Kathy, I know you've had your finger in a lot of different pies in terms of recreational dancing and research and performance. So I'd like if you can tell us a little bit about some of those aspects in the 70s.
Well, I'm been a folk dancer shorter than Randy. In this book of Marty's, which I hope everybody knows about, in this picture over here, it's probably one of the first 2 nights that I ever went folk dancing. And that's when it was a fall folk festival in Manhattan. And Lily Booty came to teach Bulgarian dance, and Barry Mezov and his wife were there with Tim Rice. And I went there and got in touch with Lily Booty, who was a Bulgarian choreographer. And shortly thereafter, we got her to teach in my loft downtown in Manhattan. And that, after a couple weeks, that turned into the Bosilic Dance Group. But the lead-in is that I went to Bulgaria before I was a folk dancer, because a Thracian Gold Treasure show came in the Met Museum where I was the secretary. And it came in my department, and there were 2 really cool guys who came, and we went to visit them the next summer and spent like 5 weeks going around everywhere. When I came back, in a bookstore on Madison Avenue, there was a flyer. Do you remember flyers? It's how you found anything out. And it said, these American women, Ženska Pesna, were going to have a concert. And it said Bulgarian songs. So I went to that, and I got a flyer for this fall festival that Marty and Ethel put on. And at that fall festival, I got a flyer for Michael Ginsberg's Wednesday class. And I went there and Michael said, hi. And, I'm Michael. I said, I'm Kathy, and I'm here to learn Bulgarian dance. And he said, well, it's a Balkan class. You're going to learn Greek and blah and all these other things. And I said, no, I just want to learn Bulgarian. Until today, my blinders are kind of on that, but then I have an interest in Norwegian and Hungarian Transylvanian dance. So I just wanted to say that, when Marty's book came and I saw that photograph, I remember what clothes I had on by looking at that picture. So thank you, Marty, not only for that memory, but for all that you did. And then I ended up working at Balkan Arts, met Joe there, Janice, and a lot of other people. And I worked for Carl Finger on some trips to Bulgaria. And on one of those trips, one of my folk dancer friends found out that somehow from Yves Moreau that we could go to school in Bulgaria. And Christine Kalash from Tomov Ensemble and I and another person, we really didn't like our day jobs. And so we signed up to go to this school in Bulgaria, and we thought we were just going to dance all day. And I got there before the others, and I found out from the director of the school that it was a school for teachers. And the guy said, the head of the school said, well, of course you read, write, and speak Bulgarian. And I said, sure, yes, or da. And I knew a few words by then. And he said, we don't have any place for you to live because the dormitory burned down, but, we'll help you. Anyway, the first day of school, the person that sat next to me was another irregular student, and that was Ilyana Bojanova. So we were in the same class in school. And it just kind of folds out. It was accidental that we ended up in this school for teachers that taught people how to run, let's say, like a Y program for after school for kids or older folks or whatever. And I never thought that I would use that material that I learned for anything except working with our little group Bosilic in New York. But it turns out that since COVID, I taught like close to 500 folk dance classes, and only in Bulgarian dance, online from my living room. If you asked me when I was 15 that I would use a device in my own home to teach people from Vancouver to San Diego some dance from a place across the ocean, I would never have believed it. So it's a long and convoluted story, but there's so many people that contributed to what I love about all this dance and music, and every one of you on there, on this screen, had some part in this story, even Skids at one point or another. So I don't know, Joni, if that answered any kind of question.
It did. Thank you. We have about a little less than 5 minutes left, I believe. So I just want to, and first of all, thank you to this amazing panel. Your stories are just incredible and resonated with a lot of people at home. But one way or another, all of you are still somewhat involved in folk dance 50 years later. Oh, look at these pictures. So what's our future for folk dance? Do you see this continuing for another 50 years? How do we continue it for another 5 or 10? When the average age of our dancers is now 70 or 80. So what do you see as our future for folk dance? As I said, we have about 5 minutes left. So anyone who'd like to chime in, please do so.
I'll throw something in. 2 weeks ago, the ZU festival. I mean, if you haven't experienced that yet, you need to experience that, because I'm thinking back to the early 70s when Marty and the West Coast, some musicians were starting to play live music. And Michael Ginsberg's Wednesday night classes always have live music. Balkan music and dance camps have live music. And there's a connection there. I think that's got to be the future.
Good point. And the ZU Festival, if you haven't been, go. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. Some of the best musicians in the country.
Can I say something as well?
Yes, yes.
So we went up to Golden Fest and had a great time. It was packed. I mean, almost a little bit too much for me, but the energy of all these young people dancing or trying to dance or even jumping up and down to the music was invigorating and exciting. And I'm really hoping and I'm hopeful that that the dancing will continue in some format. When my parents were dancing, and then people of my generation started to dance, we were doing different things than what they were doing. And we had hotshot dances, and I'm thinking, well, maybe they'll find something else or something different, or maybe they'll go back to doing more of the village dances than all the choreographed dances that we've been learning all these years. Or maybe they'll come back and learn the choreographed dances after, who knows? But hopefully they'll do something different. And just one other thing, my daughter has been taking her friends to Golden Fest and to Balkan Camp. And so there's hope.
Let me add to
Say
that,
something too, Kathy.
Linda,
Yeah.
and that is that the EEFC has done a fabulous job with their children's programs, and I think that is very, very important in looking to the future, because the kids grow up with it. And
Right. Right.
And my daughters, Amberly and Ariana Rosen, play this music. So hopefully,
Not only they play it, but they're
dance
really
at the
top-notch
same time.
musicians. Really.
They
they
play
dance
and
at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, there's another thread, that the Bulgarians have a once a month dance in New York Horoteko on a Friday. And there are people from our folk dance circles that go there and are a lot older than the young Bulgarian Americans that are dancing there. And it's getting pretty full and it's dark and they put out free snacks. And around the country when we started Bosilic in 1979, we were maybe one or two groups that focused on Bulgarian dance in America that were not connected to the church or something. And now there are about 96 or 98 groups in the US and Canada that are Bulgarian folk dance groups. A lot of them are ethnic groups, and they come to Festival Vareya in Chicago in April. And it's almost going kind of stretching back the other way, going back to the ethnic communities. Just like in Bulgaria, there's a lot of dancing going on. I don't know what it's going to be, and it's also fun that Eve Row dances are being done on the big Sunday dance in Plovdiv in Bulgaria, because somebody found his 6 DVDs and they started using some of those dances. So the world is kind of going in a circle.
I just wanted to say one thing about the Folk Arts Center International.
Can't hear you, David.
Yeah, speak up just a little louder, please, David.
Sure. I just wanted to put in a plug for the Folk Arts Center's International Weekend and weekdays at Pinewoods. There's a bunch of kids, our kids, my kids, and other kids in our community that have grown up in a folk dance village 1 week a year every summer. And they're sticking with it. We've got a group of those kids that are playing music at folk dances here in Boston. And a bunch of their friends are coming in and dancing and keeping it going. It took a while, but the youngsters are coming in.
And we have Katrina up in New York, and she's great. We love having her.
I'm delighted.
Thank you for her. She's a real gem.
Problem.
Andy Taylor also has a performing group, Ladost, which is young kids again. So there's hope.
I just would like to chime in that I would love to see more young people take an interest in the dance, because so many of them get drawn to the music. And if we could get some young people who could be role models as dancers, I think that would improve the situation with regard to dance.
I think you're right, Steph.
I want to thank the panel. We're actually out of time. It was not enough time, and hopefully there'll be opportunities for us to do more of this. we will do more of this tomorrow for the West Coast at 4 o'clock Pacific.
Thank
But
you. Thank you for putting this together. That was wonderful.
Oh, and I'm
Yeah.
like overwhelmed with with the quality of this conversation. So I want to thank the panel, all of you, and I want to thank Joni for moderating.